the halacha says that if somebody asks you what day it is today, you're not supposed to tell him today if you didn't count yet, but rather you tell him yesterday's. So let's say today is the sixth day, and somebody asks you, what's today? Says the Shulchan Aruch in Taf Beit, that you tell him yesterday was 5. Because if you tell him today is 6, you can't count anymore. So an interesting question, very interesting. In the Sefer Yuna Moadim, from the Rosh Yeshiva of Netivot, of Kamil, of Chaim Kamil Zatzal, he asks, since we have a rule, we have a klal, michlal hen, אתה שומע עליו, so whenever I tell you something that it's going to come out, you'll understand it comes out the other way, so right away that is considered, as you said, for instance, in this case, the counting. So if I tell you yesterday was 5, you know that today is 6. Why is it not considered like you counted? That's his question. Michlal hen אתה שומע עליו is the Oraita, says Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman in Kovetz Arot. Therefore, when I tell you yesterday was 5, that means that today is 6. So how can I still count with a bracha? Good question?
What do you mean it's the Oraita? Sorry.
Well, the concept of Michlal hen אתה שומע עליו.
לא, הוא ספרתם, זה לא דרך ספירה. ספירה זה היום.
כן, אבל הביאור הלכה מביא שאם אני אומר לך לדוגמה 1 ועוד 1, היום זה 1 ועוד 1, לדוגמה על יום שני, זה גם דרך ספירה. יש...
אבל שהוא לא רוצה לקיים מצווה, וזה שאומר מה שהיה אתמול.
הוא מפקיע, ולכן למה הוא לא יכול להגיד לדוגמה כוונה נגדית, שהוא יחשוב כוונה נגדית גם כן... כן, ברור שיכול. ברור שיכול. זו תשובה טובה. He says a nice answer. He says like this. He says, first of all, one answer like the Rabbi says, that you need counting. You need to establish a day. If you're telling me yesterday, it's not establishing a day. That's one answer. But more gishmak, very gishmak, he says that when do you say Michlal hen אתה שומע עליו? When it has to be that way, without any external, additional information that I have, or knowledge that I have. For example, if I tell you that if you come today, I will not read in the Sefer. That means that if you don't come, I will read in the Sefer. Tell you if you close the door, I'm not going to eat the apple. That means that if you do close the door, I will eat the apple. It comes out, it's mukhrach, it's michlal hen אתה שומע עליו. But when I tell you yesterday was 5, who tells you that today is 6? Just because the fact that the Torah told you to count every day. Otherwise, could be yesterday was 5, and that's when the Sefirat ends, and there's no 6. How do you know there's supposed to be 6? Because the Torah tells you count. Also, could be that yesterday was 5 and today's 4. How do you know you count forward? Maybe you count backwards. Any external information that you add, it's not michlal hen אתה שומע עליו, and therefore it's not considered that counting of the 6th day. That's a very gishmak answer.
לפי זה אם אתה אומר, היום פחות 39, אז אולי גם זה ספירה נקרא.
היום
פחות 39, היום פחות... אם אתה אומר פחות.
נו. אתה אומר ביום הראשון אני אומר, היום? מה?
היום 5.
נו.
היום פחות 44, אז זה גם נקרא ספירה.
אז זה מה שאני אומר לך, יפה, אז התשובות שלנו יענו לך לאותו דבר. Okay. So, the question we like to address today has to do with Tvilat Kelim. In Ilchot Tvilat Kelim, we have a halacha of bracha that you say when you are doing Tvilat Kelim in Siman Kuf Kaf, in your Deah. The halacha says that when you tovel, יברך על טבילת כלים, ואם שניים או יותר, מברך על טבילת כלים. The bracha you say before you dip the kelim in the mikveh. says Rabbi Kiva over here, אם לא בירך קודם הטבילה, צריך עיון אם יוכל לברך אחר כך, עיין באשל אברהם, אור חיים סימן שכ"ג. So he's מסופק. The truth is that it's a halacha בפירוש in Shulchan Aruch in סימן שכ"ג in הלכות שבת, that if a person on Shabbat has a kli that needs tevila, he wants to use it. He can't use it without tevila. Even though it's a question, can you use kelim without tevila? Maybe like Rabbi Yerucham said that the mitzvah is to be tovel. If you can't, he said the idea, I wrote about this in the Sefer, Shaf Veyativ, on what happens if, what Rabbi Yerucham speaks about, Magen Avraham brings, that if you have a tzitzit on Shabbat that became pasul, you're allowed to wear the beged in a place that you need to wear the beged. Let's say it's Kvod Briot and so on. So the Magen Avraham brings from Rabbi Yerucham famous that you could wear the beged because the mitzvah is not, there's no isur to wear beged without tzitzit, but rather there's a mitzvah to put tzitzit on the beged. And since on Shabbat I can't put tzitzit on the beged because I'm anus, so therefore I'm not mechuyav. That's what he says. And Motzei Shabbat, I'll do it. Same thing, the poskim say, could be by Tvilat Kelim. Tvilat Kelim is a mitzvah to be tovel the keli. If you can't be tovel the keli, that was the time that people couldn't go to be tovel the keli. In the time that people were not allowed to come out of the house. The mikvaot were closed. You couldn't go anywhere, really. So you buy a new keli and need to use. You're allowed to use without the tevilah. There was a svara like that was coming around, that maybe it's the same thing, that since you can't be tovel, there's no isur to not to be mishtamesh. Chachamim say that's the biur halachai brings down Shin Kaf Gimel, that one shouldn't use midirabanan, but that's only when you can. But if you can't, just like the tzitzit, if you can't, you're allowed to use it. Anyway, that's a separate point, but over here it says that on Shabbat, if you have a keli that you want to use, you never took it to the mikveh yet. So what's your takana? You're allowed to take it and take it to the river, for example, and make believe you are filling the keli with water. You put it inside, you immerse the keli inside, and you're showing like you're picking up water with that. With doing such an act, the keli was completely in the river, and you yotzeh tevila. This is how it's brought down in Shin Kaf Gimel Zayin, kli שראוי למלאות בו מים, ימלאנו מים מן המקווה, ועלתה לו טבילה. Says the Magen Avraham, but be careful, don't say bracha before you are dipping it or before you doing that act, because if you say bracha, it looks now like you tovel the keli to be metaher the keli, not anymore like you're filling up water. What's the problem with dipping a keli in a mikveh on Shabbat? It's called metaken mana. So therefore it's not permitted. What about a person? Can a person go into the mikveh? Maybe it's also metaken mana. How could a person go into the mikveh? So the halacha is what? Nira kemeker. It looks like he's cooling himself, and because of that, it will be permitted. That's the reason a person can go into a mikveh on Shabbat or into the ocean to dip, and it's not so by a keli. By a keli, you don't have nira kemeker. So you have to use this kind of tricks in order to dip the keli, but you're not allowed to say bracha. That's what the Magen Avraham says, and the Mishnah Berurah brings it down. Oh, says the biur halacha. קשה לי, אם כן באישה נידה דקיימה לן ביורד היה סימן קצ"ז, מותרת לטבול בשבת, והטעם משום שנראה כמקר. ואין אחד מן הפוסקים שאומר דווקא בלי ברכה. Of course she says bracha before she goes to the mikveh on Shabbat. So how is it possible to be מחלק between the two? אחר כך מצאתי קושייה הזו בספר ישועות יעקב. וישב, what's the יישוב of the ישועות יעקב? משום שמנהגנו לברך אחר התפילה, על כן בשעת הטבילה לא מנקר. Oh, so he says over here that when you say the bracha afterwards, at the time of the tvilah, it doesn't look like you're doing it for the tvilah, because you're not saying bracha. And afterwards you say the bracha. Afterwards already, after the act, you could say the bracha. But while you're doing it, you're not saying bracha. Before, you're not saying bracha. This is the opinion of the Rabbi, as you all know. The Shulchan Aruch argues, he says that the bracha should be said before a woman goes to the mikveh, and that is the question of the biur halacha here. תנח לרמה, סימן רש, ביורדה, אבל המחבר שם, דסתם כשיטת רוב הראשונים כמעט כולם, דסביר לה בכל טבילה מברך קודם הטבילה, לבד מטבילת גר, משום דקת יגב הלא חזי, היה לו להזכיר בבית יוסף שלו שלא תברך. If that is the din, so he comes, according to Magen Avraham, Isha, Nida, should not make a bracha when she goes to the mikveh, according to the Shulchan Aruch, because the bracha is said beforehand. Yeshua Yaakov says that this would help to say the bracha afterwards. This way it doesn't look like you are tovel in the mikveh to be metaher, but rather it looks like you meker. This works only for the Rama, but not for the Shulchan Aruch.
It's not look, it's always in Makom Tzanua. I'm saying it's different. Mitzvot Kelim and Miyal Etrol. Always to read the Makom Tzanua. So maybe
Usually there's more likely to have, when a woman is Tovel, she has somebody with her. And when a person is Tovel Kelim, he doesn't need to have anybody with him. So if anything, it's the opposite. But regardless, that's a question. It's a question also for the person himself. Nir'ah makes the problem also for you. It doesn't have to be towards others. So therefore, he has over here a different, the Biur Halacha has a different malach. He says, Bepashtut, he says that once Chazal allowed a Nidah to be Tovel because she nir'et kemeker, it looks like she's cooling herself. So she's allowed already to do it with a bracha. Shuv, ממילא לא גזרו רבנן על טבילה כזאת, וממילא מותרת לברך, מה שאין כן, on other things that there's no requirement to be tovel the keli, and therefore the bracha doesn't need to say the bracha. Okay. If you want to use it. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use it. Now, this that you say the bracha before you are, you do the mitzvah, any mitzvah, we learn in Psachim, Daf Zayin. The Gemara says over here, Kol ha-mitzvot, o mevarech, over le'asiyatan. That is the Gemara in Psachim Daf Zayin. All the mitzvot, the rule is that you first say the bracha, and then you do the mitzvah. And with exception, says the Gemara, Tvilat Ger. Tvilat Ger, since the Ger can say the bracha, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ala tvila, because how could he say Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav? Kadosh Baruch Hu never commanded him. He's still a goy. So therefore he says the bracha afterwards. And there is a machloket rishonim. The Tosfot brings down already women that were noheg that way. That's how Tosfot brings. To say the bracha, even others, whenever they go to the mikveh, they say the bracha afterwards. But, אף על פי כן אומר רי שאין לגעור בנשים שמברכות אחר הטבילה, כיוון שהיא כטבילת גר דלא מעצי לברך, לא חילקו. וכן בנטילת ידיים, introduces here, נטילת ידיים לא חילקו בנטילה של אחר בית הכיסא, דלא מעצי לברך קודם, and other נטילות. In other words, although the simple understanding of Tosfot is that, like the Shulchan Aruch, that the bracha for the tvila of a woman or any other tvila except tvilat ger should be before, and tvilat ger is different because gavra lo chazi, he can't say the bracha beforehand, mashen can everybody else, they could say the bracha shel kitshanu mitzotav before they go to the mikveh. That is the chiluk that one can say. This is the chiluk that most of the Rishonim go like, and this is what the Rambam writes. Rambam writes always that the brachot, Rambam repeats this in Ilchot Brachot a few times, and then he says it also in Ilchot Tfilin and other places as well, that whenever you come to do mitzvah, first you say the bracha and then you do the mitzvah. If you didn't, you lost out on the mitzvah, on the bracha. You lost out on the bracha. The mitzvah is still valid. The bracha, you lost out. That is the opinion of the Rambam. But there are those that argue on this. First of all, on the idea of saying the bracha after the mitzvah, we found in few places that the Rama argues. Like for instance, we just mentioned Tvilat Kelim. We just mentioned, Tvilat Kelim also, by the way. The Rama says it openly. He says, Kli sheruil bo למלא ימלאנו מים מנהגים ועלתה לו טבילה. So over here, it doesn't say that one should say bracha. We said the Magen Avraham says you shouldn't say bracha. By the mitzvah of Adlakat Nerot, for instance, you say the bracha, says the Rama, after lighting the candles. So you see, you could say the bracha afterwards as well. Just he says, it's make a trick that you cover your eyes and then you open and you look at the candles. It's like you mekabel Shabbat. Now, we found the same thing by Tvilat Nida in Siman Resh Aleph, that she says the bracha, as we mentioned before, afterwards, and not before the Tvila. So you see, we found this in various places, that there is such a thing. Where do we find the Rama also that says like this openly? That's what I wanted to mention before. That on the Shchita, in Siman Yutet, we mentioned that last week. The Rama says in Shchita, Im shachat davar sheityalet bo reuta, this is Siman Yutet in Yoreh De'ah, you have something that's questionable, that you need to shech, וצריך בדיקה. You need to check it, because you have a question whether it's taref or not. If it's taref, you can't say bracha. Although there are those that wanted to say that it's at least metayer min nivlato. It's better to have trefa than to have a nevela, because nevela is metameh. But still, the Shach brings this down. Still, in Maaseh, we don't say bracha at all. That's the halacha. Says the Rama, אם שחט דבר דתיה לדבריותא וצריך בדיקה, ישחטנו בלא ברכה, וכשימצא כשר, שימצא כשר, afterwards you found it to be kosher, you checked, you saw that it is kosher, יברך על השחיטה, ובלבד שיהיה סמוך לשחיטה. And this he brings from the Or Zarua. So we have a machloket, the Rambam and the Or Zarua, and those that go, majority of the poskim go like the Rambam, but there is an opinion like this that the Rama brings down, which is the Or Zarua. The Agot Ashri brings this down, as the Shach says in Sif Katan Gimel, that im shachach velo birech kodem hashchita, yivarech achar hashchita. We have two scenarios. One scenario that the Rama brings down from the Or Zarua, and that is if you couldn't say the bracha, so it's more similar to Gavra lo Chazi, you couldn't say the bracha. Second case that the Agot Ashri brings down, that you forgot to say bracha. In other words, in a way you're negligent. You could have said a bracha, you didn't say bracha. Some poskim say that if you didn't say bracha, the whole mitzvah is not valid. You can't eat. I think the Bach brings such an opinion that you can't eat it anymore. You lost out on the shchita. You lost out on the mitzvah, which means the bracha is ma'akev the mitzvah. But we see over here a clear machloket between the Rambam and the Shach brings the Rambam. The Rambam that holds that you can't say the bracha afterwards, and if you did the mitzvah and you didn't say the bracha, you could say it afterwards. And the Agot Ashri and the Or Zarua that the Rama brings down halacha l'maaseh that you could say the bracha afterwards. And I'm saying it would be an afkamina also, could be, for the Sefirat Haomer. Sefirat Haomer, if you counted, can you say the bracha afterwards? You could have said that according to the Or Zarua, you could say the bracha afterwards because you didn't lose out the bracha yet. What's the svara to say that you didn't lose the bracha yet? What's the svara to be mechalek between the Rambam and the Or Zarua? I saw very nicely in the Sefer Mishmeret Chaim of Sheinberg, of Pinchas Sheinberg Zatzal. He has a question over there. What should be the chiluk? Why is it that when you eat something, you can't say the Birkat Hamazon once it was after Ikul. After Ikul, you can't say the Birkat Hamazon. But over here, according to the Or Zarua, according to this opinion, you could say after the mitzvah, the bracha. You did the mitzvah. According to this opinion, the Or Zarua, you could say the bracha afterwards. But if you ate something after it was mitakel, you lost out on the why over here is also like after Ikul. But once you checked, it's done. Even according to that, it's done. Secondly, yeah. Secondly, yeah, over here samuch is not half hour. Samuch for other things, not for bracha. So he says, let's pay attention. He says that, well, first of all, it's a rule. The Or Zarua is not only by shchita. The Or Zarua tells you a rule that you could say the bracha afterwards. We see that you could say afterwards. So listen to what he says. He says that the bracha on the mitzvah, why do you need to say it before? Chachamim kovea to say it before, but as long as you're doing a mitzvah, it requires a bracha. Whether you say it before or after, as long as it has some connection to the mitzvah, it's fine. You could say that once the mitzvah is here, you say the bracha is afterwards, the bracha is still valid. The bracha is valid because it's connecting to the mitzvah. Who says that it should be before? It's a very simple thing. When Chazal were kovea to kol mitzvot, mevarech over le'asiyatan, why is it that it has to be that way? It's a chatchila, that's the correct way to do. But if you couldn't do it that way, it's still chal on the mitzvah. Why not? Why can't you say it afterwards? Why is it that it needs to be before? For instance, Birkot HaShvach, we say afterwards. You hear a thunder, you say the bracha. You see, but בסדר, אבל יש דברים שאפשר לפני. לדוגמה, I'll give you an example. A person that needs to go to the bathroom. he says the bracha asher yatzar afterwards. Say before you go in.
How does he know he was able to go even?
No, a person feels that he needs to go.
How do you know he was able to go?
We can find different examples. Well, but regardless, even if you can say before, but you see that you see that the bracha was established after. So why is it that you can't say Birkat Hamazon after? It's connecting. Why is it that mitzvot needs to be over li'asiyatan? So according to that understanding, as long as it's connecting to a mitzvah, it doesn't have to be necessarily beforehand. It makes a lot of sense. What's the svara to say? What's the svara to say that the bracha has to be beforehand? What's the svara of the Rambam and those that hold that it must be beforehand? So there's a famous ritva over here in Psachim, Daf Zayin again, Daf Zayin Amud Bet, and he says the following: טעם זה שאמרו חכמים לברך על המצוות עובר לעשייתן, כדי שיתקדש תחילה בברכה, ויגלה ויודיע שהוא עושה אותה מפני מצוות השם. Interesting. It's just like we say, for instance, לשם ייחוד. You are, by saying a bracha, you are designating the mitzvah for Hashem. It's just like, in a way, like mitzvot tzrichot kavana. You're going to do a mitzvah. How do you know? By the way, that is a big argument of the Noda B'Yehuda. The Noda B'Yehuda, that was screaming at those that say L'Shem Yichud. What was the argument that he had? Those that say L'Shem Yichud is because when you say L'Shem Yichud, you are showing, it's like mitzvot tzrichot kavana. You are showing that this mitzvah you do for the purpose of the mitzvah. And you mekayem with that the mitzvot tzrichot kavana. Otherwise, maybe you're not even yotzei the mitzvah. The halacha in Shulchan Aruch is that mitzvot tzrichot kavana. That's how we posek in Samech Aleph. So therefore, that is the way one should do it. So the Noda B'Yehuda mamash goes to town. This shofech solela on those that say it, and he speaks extremely harshly, and he proves it from various places. The beginning of Kochim, that stam mitzvot, it seems like there are l'shem mitzvah, and that the fact that you say bracha is also, just like the ritva, sufficient. That's what Chazal established, and so on. So therefore, no. Well, first of all, no. Mekubalim say that you should say L'Shem Yichud. It was nitkabel already, but in his time he spoke very harshly because it's like a new thing. There was movements of newity. Anything chadash asur min Torah, anything that you come and you do, like you can today come and start doing new things. You can't just be mechadesh things. Well, there's a certain system of how Judaism works, a certain way, and you can't just come and create your own sects and ways of doing religious things. Anyway, but the Ritva says over here that is the purpose of the mitzvah, is to be miyached. Let's see the Lashon again. That the reason we do it, כדי שיתקדש תחילה. Why is it levarech al mitzvot? Why Chachamim said levarech al mitzvot over l'isen? כדי שיתקדש תחילה בברכה ויגלה ויודיע שהוא עושה אותם מפני מצוות השם יתברך. The bracha reveals and announces that you're doing the mitzvah for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if we say that is the opinion of the Rambam, you can only do it before, you can't do it after. You're trying to announce with the bracha. The bracha purpose is to announce and to say that I'm doing the following mitzvah for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you did it already, it's too late. Unlike the Orzarua, that would probably hold on the simplicity of what Rav Scheinberg said, that as long as it's connected, well, what's the difference if you say before or after? It's more correct to do it before, maybe to have such an idea of what the Ritva says, but not completely mitame. And therefore, as long as Birkat Hamitzvot. Yeah, Pashtut is Birkat Hamitzvot. You're right, Machloket in that, the Rambam and the Rosh. But Lemaise, Pashtut, without Lomdis, without all this, Pashtut, it's Birkat Hamitzvot. That's the Pashtut Advarim. Now, in the mitzvah in the bracha, of the Tvilat Kelim, we found a very interesting thing, that you say different bracha, whether it's one keli or two or more kelim. Where do we see such a thing? Yeah, that you say a different bracha. You say bracha al Tvilat Keli if you tovel one keli. If you tovel more than one keli, you say al Tvilat Kelim. That is the way the Shulchan Aruch brings down. יברך על טבילת כלי, ואם הם שניים או יותר, מברך על טבילת כלים. So over here, the מפרשים ask, why is it different than, for example, mezuzah? When you put mezuzah, whether you put one or you put more than one, you put 10, let's say, around your house, you say, שקידשנו מצוותיו וציוונו על קביעת מזוזה. It's always one. Or, for example, when you wear tefillin, you say להניח tefillin. But if you're wearing only one, because you don't have two, or a person that can't wear two for any reason, you can only wear one. So he doesn't say, אשר קידשנו מצוותיו וציוונו להניח תפילה. Why not? So there's few answers to answer this. They're all hard to understand, but there's few answers. One is brought in Chacham Ovadia, in Alichot Olam, Parashat Matot, Daf Resh Nun Daled. He says, on the question of tefillah, he says, Imaniach tefillin shel Rosh bilvad, that's what the Shulchan Aruch brings down in Siman Kaf Vav. Mevarech al mitzvat tefillin. He says, why? You should have said mitzvat tefillah. You're only wearing tefillin shel Rosh. So he says an answer, אפשר שלא רצו לקבוע ברכה בנוסח זה פן ייטו לחשוב שמברך על אמירת התפילה. You might be mistaken when you hear such a thing to say that the bracha is for the tefillah. You say bracha on the tefillah, not on the tefillin. So what is tefillin? What's tefillah and tefillin? Is that the same shoresh? Is that the same thing? No. Tefillah means to pray. And tefillin means, there's different meaning in the mefarshim, what tefillin. Either it means a kishut, a certain, what's a kishut? Something for beauty, huh? Ornament. Where do we see this? In Perek Bamei Isha, it says, Isha yotzet betfilin uvesунבתין, which means that there was such a ornament called tefillin, not tefillin of our tefillin. Certain thing that she wore. So you see that there's such a lashon. Other want to say that it's maybe the lashon that they use by Pinchas, by Falel Pinchas. He went to a war. Some say that on tefillah, some say that on tefillin. So whatever you learn, it seems like that one. It seems like it's a different understanding, and therefore one should not make a mistake that when he says להניח תפילה, it should not think that it's going on the tefillah itself. Also because the Ashkenazim say al mitzvat. So when they wear the Rosh, they say al mitzvat.
That answers only his question is
the Shulchan Aruch says שאם מניח תפילין של ראש בלבד מברך על מצוות תפילין. So why is it not mitzvat tefillah? Not להניח, על מצוות תפילה. Okay? Concerning the mezuzah, if you say אשר קידשנו מצוותיו וציוונו לקבוע מזוזות. Why can't you say mezuzot? Says Chacham Ovadia that you might be mistaken to think that you put mezuzah on both sides of the door. Because of that, Chachamim didn't want to change the bracha if you're putting more than one mezuzah. You're putting a mezuzah, and you say, Asher Kshan Mitzatav, and you're planning to put over here 10. Asher Kshan Mitzatav, Tzivanu, Likvoa mezuzot. Mezuzot, you would think maybe you need to put on both sides. מה זה? לא, זה לא נכון. לא נכון. לא, כבוד הרב. לא, מזוזות ביתך ושעריך, לא. ביתך ושעריך, כל הביתים וכל השערים בתוך הבית. לא, לא. לא, זה לא. לא, זה לא נכון.
כל חדר זה דאורייתא? כל חדר זה
כן,
דאורייתא?
כל חדר זה דאורייתא. Sometimes you have other things that are questionable. For instance, if you don't have a door, so the Rosh says the מחלוקת הרמב"ם and the Rosh, whether a doorway without a door requires. For instance, Beit Shaar. For instance, if you have a place of storage, so Beit HaOtzar. So that's a מחלוקת. For instance, if you have to be מרבע, 4 על 4, you have a place that's smaller than 4 על 4, but you could be מרבע, מחלוקת הרמב"ם and the Rosh. So all these things, you wouldn't say bracha because you חושש, maybe for the opinions that it's not the right. But פשטות, all the rooms in the house are deoraita. Okay, so let's just understand. So this is all. You say the bracha because the tikkun halashon. The truth is, I saw in the Sefer, Yeshuot Yaakov, he brings down a different understanding. He says that when you say mezuzah, it doesn't refer to what we call a mezuzah, which means the scroll. Mezuzah in reality is the doorway. It's a shem mush'al. We take the name of the doorway and we attach it to the scroll. But the name of the scroll is not really mezuzah. When the Torah says mezuzot betecha, it means the doorway, not the scroll. Chachamim gave it a name according to attach it the shem mush'al. They gave it the same name, but it's not shem etzem. It's not the real meaning of the name. Unlike, okay, but that's the fact. Unlike the kelim, when you take kelim is kelim. That's a shem toar, shem etzem. That is the shem etzem. This is the name of the keli. Therefore, accordingly, when we're talking about shem mush'al, we always use mezuzah. That's it. You don't have to use plural because that is not what it is. It's not, if you have two, it's mezuzot. The house has mezuzot betecha. The house has two. But shem mush'al, it's always mezuzah. There's no mezuzot. There's no such thing mezuzot. Doesn't exist on the scroll mezuzot. We call it mezuzot. That's the lashonot we use. But the shem mush'al that Chachamim took, they attached, they derived from what it really is mezuzah, and it stays mezuzah. Nice answer, no? I mean, it's. Yeshuot Yaakov. Huh?
I want to put two talitot on it.
No, it's the shem etzem. So that's the same thing by kelim. You're saying kelim because there is over here plural. Another answer I saw in again Mishmeret Chaim from Rabbi Sheinberg Zatzal. He says that mezuzah, there's a mitzvah on each door to put a mezuzah. Each door you have a mitzvah to put a mezuzah. So therefore, since you have individual mitzvah on each door, the bracha indicates what is the bracha? Bracha always describes what the mitzvah is. The brachot are very precise. They describe the mitzvah. For instance, when you say litatef betzitzit, so from here the Shulchan Aruch derives that it needs to be aituf, kederech haishmaelim, and so on. Whenever you have a bracha, take a look at the bracha, try to learn it. Lishav basukah, whatever it is. So you have mitzvah lishav basukah, lishmoa kol shofar. So the Beit Yosef explained, you don't say tkiyat shofar lishmoa, because the mitzvah is lishmoa, and so on and so forth. I'm saying the Beit Yosef is full of that, explaining the brachot according to what they say, and that describes you the mitzvah. So over here, the mitzvah is an independent mitzvah on each door post to put a mezuzah. Unlike the kelim, there's no mitzvah on every keli. The mitzvah is not on the keli, mitzvah is on the gava. You don't want to be tovel the keli. Don't be tovel the keli. You don't have to use kelim. If you want to be tovel the kelim, so it's your obligation. It's not an obligation on the doorway, and therefore, because of that, you don't have the mitzvah of saying it keli, because then you would think each one is a separate mitzvah. That is what he wants to say. I'm saying all these answers are like, they're not easy to understand because the question is really a big question. And so you have to find all kind of answers, and these are all answers of very late Achronim.
It might be you. I know it's not a good deal. But the two and Maran were different. Right? Maran says im tovel shnayim or yoter vevarich al tvilat kelim. But the two added a word.
או שלושה.
ביחד. So if I'm right, so here it's an opportunity to be tovel a few together. So you can't say keli because it's not keli, it's three keli. So maybe I'm just saying, maybe the reason why the two wrote beyachad,
right?
Say only when this is the only mitzvah you cannot kovea shne mezuzot beyachad. So it's what just what likva mezuzah.
Right.
But here you can do.
There's a sefer Be'er Mayim Chaim on Tvilat Kelim that wanted to say such a thought, like you saying, to be mechalek between Tvilah together and Tvilah individually and independently. There is such a thing. I'm not saying that, but lemaise the halacha would be that you are dipping them one after the other. You still say al Tvilat Kelim. That's what you would say. Come back to Sefirat Haomer. The way we're saying right now, you can really attach the understanding of the Taz to the fact that if a person was asking you what's today, and you told him today is the 6th day, so still, since you weren't mechaven to be yotzeh, you still could count with the bracha. That's what he says. But really, you could have said, if we go with this whole ma'alach that we're explaining right now, that according to the Rema, you see from the Rema, and you see the Rema in Ilchot Shrita and Ilchot Vila, and especially when we're dealing with Vila, there are those that want to say that Vilat Kelim shouldn't be any different, because the Rema says we compare all the Tvilot. Tvila of Nida is the same as Tvilat Ger, and all the Tvilot that you say the bracha afterwards, and it's added also to that Netilat Yadayim. Although Netilat Yadayim you have two svarot to say the bracha afterwards. One svara is maybe the bracha afterwards is said on the Niguv Yadayim, and then it's over L'asiyatan, because that's part of the requirement and part of the mitzvah, Niguv Yadayim, because you can't eat with Yadayim retuvot, because when you eat with Yadayim retuvot, you're doing the bread, ma'us, nim'as. So therefore, there's a requirement to dry your hands as well, and bracha goes on that, and therefore it's over L'asiyatan. Second svara is to say that you could say afterwards, because beforehand, Gavra lo chazi. But not always that a Gavra lo chazi. Stam Yadayim, you could still say bracha. You're allowed to say brachot with Stam Yadayim. You take an apple and you want to eat it. You don't need to wash your hand. In Rashut Zayin it says, Anotel Yadayim leperot, arei ze migasei haruach. The Mishnah Berurah adds over there that unless you're doing it, you're not doing it as a requirement, you're doing it for extra tahara, you want to be extra machmir, that's fine. But you don't have to, so therefore Gavra lo chazi is only in various places, like for instance, Hayotze mi bet hakiseh, but not Stam Yadayim. Still we say the bracha afterwards. So the Rama we found in few places that you could say the bracha after the mitzvah. It clearly brings that down. It clearly says it in Ilchot Shrita and Yutet. So therefore, maybe you could say the same idea when we're talking about Sefirat Haomer as well. When you do Sefirat Haomer and Tvilat Kelim. Tvilat Kelim, you can compare it to all the other Tvilot that you say the bracha afterwards. And according to that, we can understand that what it says in Shin Kaf Gimel, Kli sherui lemalot bo mayim memalenu mayim min hamikve ve'alta lo tvila, the Magen Avraham says that you shouldn't say bracha. Shouldn't say bracha, could be even afterwards you can't say bracha, because even afterwards it still shows that you're doing, since the Rama would hold that saying bracha afterwards is still correct normally. So over here you shouldn't say bracha, because if you're saying bracha afterwards, it expresses that the bracha is on the Tvilat Kelim, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. So therefore the Magen Avraham says that you shouldn't say bracha not before and not after. That would be the svara. But when we're dealing with other things like Sefirat Haomer, I would say that could be that the Rama would agree that if you didn't say the bracha before, you could say afterwards. If somebody asks you what's today and you told them 6 days Haomer, so afterwards, if you say bracha right afterwards, could be that you could attach that bracha as we explained before, that bracha afterwards, as long as it's done besamuch right away, it still shows, it's still connected to mitzvah, it still shows that it's on the mitzvah. Lemaise, of course, we're saying just lepilpula be'alma, it's not like this la'alacha, but that's what we can say that comes out.
Being called the you shouldn't say a word after anything.
Okay, okay, okay.
Anything that's to do with the book.
Okay.